I never thought anyone noticed. At least, I didn't think it was strange, being awake at 2 in the morning every night. For me, the world was quieter then, less judgmental, less busy. The darkness felt like a shield, and the silence like a companion. But that changed the night my neighbor leaned over the fence with a curious smile and asked, "Why are you always awake at 2 a.m.?" I laughed it off, tried to shrug like it was nothing. But deep down, I froze. Because the truth is, I wasn't the only one awake at that hour. I knew he was too, and that was exactly why I stayed up. My name is Daniel. I've lived in this neighborhood for 6 years. It's quiet, middle class, ordinary. You know, the kind of place where people mow their lawns every Saturday and wave at each other out of habit. And my neighbor, Mr. Carter, fit perfectly into that mold. He was polite, well-kept, the sort of guy who always had a clean driveway and a friendly nod when you passed. But there was something about him that felt off. I started noticing it my second year here. Whenever I couldn't sleep, I'd sit by my window and stare into the night. And every single time, without fail, I'd see a light flick on across the street. His house. Same time, same hour. 2 in the morning. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe he had insomnia. Maybe he worked late. Maybe it was nothing. But after months of this, I realized it was a pattern. And then I started hearing things. Soft noises drifting through the night air. Sometimes it was the faint creak of floorboards. Other times, muffled voices, as if someone was arguing behind closed curtains. But the strangest thing was how often I'd catch a figure moving past his upstairs window, even though I knew he lived alone. I tried to ignore it. Really, I did. But the more I told myself not to care, the more impossible it became. And maybe that's why I stayed awake. Because some part of me knew that if I closed my eyes, I'd miss whatever was happening across the street. And then, just last week, he caught me. I had gone out for air, standing in my driveway under the flickering streetlight, when he appeared. Out of nowhere. He didn't look angry, just curious. He leaned on the fence between our yards, his voice low, almost playful, when he asked that question. "Why are you always awake at 2 a.m.? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile I didn't feel, and I gave him the only answer I could. "Because I know you are too." His smile didn't fade. If anything, it widened. For a moment, the night felt heavier, like the shadows pressed closer around us. And then he said something that sent a chill racing down my spine, but I'll get to that. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found peace. After years of renting cramped apartments, the little blue house at the end of Maple Street felt like a dream. It was quiet, safe, and full of families who waved when they passed by. Kids rode their bikes in the cul-de-sac. Elderly couples walked their dogs at dusk. On the surface, it looked like a postcard. And then there was Mr. Carter. He was in his mid-40s, always neatly dressed, with dark hair combed back like he had stepped out of a black and white photograph. He wasn't unfriendly, but he kept to himself. You'd see him trimming his hedges or washing his car, but you never saw anyone visit him. No family barbecues, no holiday decorations, no sound of laughter from his yard. Just silence. At first, I didn't think much of it. We weren't close. Neighbors don't have to be. But small things began to stand out. For one, he never seemed tired. No matter what hour of the night I saw him awake. His eyes were sharp, almost too alert, like someone who was always listening for something. I'd tell myself it was paranoia. Yet, the longer I lived here, the more uneasy I felt. Every night, around the same time, I'd wake up without an alarm. Something, maybe instinct, pulled me from sleep. I'd sit by the window, pull the curtain back just slightly, and there it was, the faint glow from his upstairs room. Always on at 2 a.m. Always. Sometimes, when the wind carried sound just right, I could hear a thud. Once, I heard something that almost sounded like a scream. Cut off quickly, swallowed by silence. My chest would tighten, and I'd press closer to the window, staring, waiting. But nothing else would come. Just stillness, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I thought about asking him once, just casually, neighbor to neighbor. But every time I tried, the words dried up in my throat. And honestly, I was afraid of what he might say. So instead, I made excuses for myself. Maybe he was just a night owl. Maybe he worked from home. Maybe the sounds were the house settling or the echoes of the street. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The strangest part was how, over time, it began to feel less like I was watching him and more like he was waiting for me. Almost as if he knew I'd be there, at my window, staring back. That's why, when he finally spoke to me, when he finally broke the silence, it shook me more than I want to admit. Because he didn't ask casually. He didn't stumble into the question. He asked like a man who already knew the answer. And when I replied, when I told him I knew he was awake too, he didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. After that night, things shifted. It wasn't just a passing glance over the fence anymore. It was as if the air between our houses had changed, charged, heavy, like static before a storm. I tried to go back to normal, telling myself his question was harmless, maybe even a joke. But then I noticed him watching me more often. Not in an obvious way, but in these fleeting moments, like when I pulled into my driveway and caught him at his window, blinds tilted just enough for me to see his silhouette. Or when I left for groceries and saw him standing in his yard, hands tucked neatly into his pockets, staring at nothing, yet somehow staring through me. The strangest part? He started timing it. I'd walk outside at night, and minutes later, he'd appear too. Always calm, always smiling like it was a coincidence. But coincidences don't happen every single night. I stopped sleeping altogether. Every sound in the dark made my heart jump. A faucet drip, a creak in the floor. It all felt amplified, like the world was conspiring to keep me awake. And each time, when I looked out my window at 2 a.m., his light was already on, waiting. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the courage to ask, shouting across the quiet street, "What do you do every night at that hour?" There was a pause. The street was empty except for the two of us, shadows stretching long under the yellow glow of the lamppost. He tilted his head, almost amused, and finally said, "I could ask you the same." My stomach nodded. His voice wasn't angry. It was steady, calm, too calm. And it terrified me more than if he'd screamed. That was when I noticed something. Behind him, in the upstairs window of his house, a figure moved. Slow, deliberate, a tall shadow crossing the room. But Mr. Carter was standing outside. I blinked, my throat tightening. When I looked back, the window was empty again, curtains swaying slightly as if someone had just passed by. He followed my gaze. And then, without breaking eye contact, he smiled wider than I'd ever seen before. Finally, he whispered. After that night, I couldn't shake the image of that shadow in his upstairs window. It haunted me. I knew what I saw. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something, was in his house. But how could that be, if he lived alone? The days that followed blurred together. I found myself obsessing, watching him more closely, waiting for signs. He never looked rattled. In fact, he seemed calmer than ever. Almost like he'd been waiting for me to notice. At work, I couldn't focus. At home, every creak set my nerves on fire. And still, when 2 a.m. came, I sat at the window, eyes locked on that faint glow across the street. My heart thudded harder each night. I knew something was coming. I could feel it like a storm building inside my chest. And then, things got stranger. One night, I swear I heard footsteps outside my house. Slow, steady, circling. I peeked through the blinds, holding my breath. The street was empty. No one there. But when I turned back toward Carter's house, his light flicked on at that exact moment, as if he knew I was looking. Another time, I woke not at 2, but at 1:30, and his light was already on, waiting. It was like he had anticipated me, beating me to it, pulling me into his rhythm. I began noticing little changes too. My mailbox left open. A faint knock on my door at midnight. 3 taps, slow and deliberate, though no one was there when I opened it. I told myself it was kids playing pranks, but in my gut, I knew better. Finally, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, pulled on a jacket, and stepped outside. The air was icy, the street eerily silent. I crossed toward his house, each step heavy with dread. His curtains were drawn, but the glow from inside leaked through. I raised my hand, hesitating at his door. My knuckles barely touched the wood before it swung open on its own. No creak, no delay, like he'd been standing right there, waiting for me. And he was. Carter stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark robe, expression calm, eyes glinting in the dim light. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he almost looked pleased. "You finally came," he said softly. His voice had no warmth, no welcome, just inevitability, like this moment had been set in stone. I opened my mouth to speak, but then I saw it again. That movement. Behind him, deeper in the house, a shadow passed by the hallway. Taller than him. Wrong somehow. Its shape didn't match anything human. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to turn and run. But before I could move, Carter leaned closer, his words a whisper that froze me where I stood. Now you'll understand. I thought the shadow was the twist. I thought the horror was standing there, inches from me. But I was wrong. Because as Carter stepped aside, gesturing me into the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall of his hallway hung photographs. Dozens of them. Old, faded, some black and white, some newer. And every single one was of me. Me at my window. Me stepping into my driveway. Me walking to my car. Even me asleep in my own bed. My knees nearly buckled. I couldn't breathe. How? When? Carter's smile widened as he watched my eyes dart across the images. I told you, he said softly, almost with affection. You're awake because I am. And I'm awake because of you. Before I could move, before I could even process the nightmare on those walls, I saw something worse, something impossible. In the corner of one photo, behind me in my own living room, was the same dark figure I had seen in his window. It wasn't just in his house. It had been in mine. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to run, to get out of that house, but my legs refused to move. My eyes kept darting from the photos on the wall to the empty hallway behind Carter, where the shadow had slipped away. You've seen it, haven't you? He said quietly, his tone no longer playful but grave, almost reverent. That's why you're awake. That's why we both are. Once you notice it, you can never sleep again. I shook my head, my throat dry. What is it? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for a small door under the staircase and pulled it open. A rush of cold air spilled out, colder than the night outside. Inside, darkness swirled, deeper than any shadow I'd ever seen. And then I heard it. Breathing. Ragged, uneven, inhuman. The figure stepped forward, long limbs, head bowed, body shifting like smoke trapped in skin. Its face was obscured, but I felt its eyes lock onto me, heavy and suffocating. I stumbled back, panic surging, but Carter grabbed my arm. His grip was iron. Don't fight it, he hissed. It's chosen you now. That's why you wake it too. That's why it comes. I wrenched free, adrenaline flooding my veins. You're insane, I shouted, bolting for the door. But before I could escape, the shadow surged past me, impossibly fast, and for a split second, it wasn't Carter holding me anymore. It was me. My own face, my own body, reflected in the thing's shifting form. I screamed, stumbling backward into the streetlight outside. And when I turned, gasping for air, Carter was gone. The house was dark, silent. Had any of it been real? I looked up at my own window across the street. The light was on, and standing there, perfectly still, was me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I couldn't, not after what I saw. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that figure wearing my face, standing at my window, watching. The line between what was real and what wasn't had been shattered, and I couldn't piece it back together. The next morning, I tried to confront Carter. His house was empty, the curtains drawn, his car gone. It looked abandoned, like no one had lived there in years. The neighbors swore they hadn't seen him in weeks. One even laughed, saying, "That place has been vacant since before you moved in." My stomach dropped. Vacant? How could that be? I had spoken to him. I had seen him. I had walked into his house. I started digging. Old property records, county archives, anything I could find. And the deeper I went, the stranger it became. There was no Mr. Carter listed at that address. No trace of him. Just reports from decades ago. Neighbors complaining about lights flicking on at 2 in the morning, figures in the upstairs window, unexplained noises that never stopped until the families moved away. The same pattern. Always the same. That's when it hit me. Carter wasn't the beginning. He wasn't even the cause. He was just like me. Someone who noticed, someone who stayed awake, someone who was claimed by whatever lived in that house. And now it was my turn. I tried to fight it. I unplugged every lamp, covered every mirror, even boarded up my own window. But every night at 2 a.m., I woke up. Not by choice, by force. My eyes snapped open, my body restless, as if something was shaking me awake from inside. And sure enough, across the street, that same faint glow would flicker in Carter's window. Only now, when the curtains shifted, I didn't see him anymore. I saw me. It was always me. Standing there, watching myself. I've stopped asking why. Some things don't come with answers. only inheritances. And this, whatever it is, feels like mine now. If you're wondering what happened to Carter, maybe I've taken his place. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe one day you'll move into a quiet neighborhood and notice your neighbor's light turning on at 2 a.m. Maybe you'll wave politely, thinking nothing of it. And maybe they'll wave back. But when the day comes that you wake in the middle of the night without reason, when you feel the weight of unseen eyes pulling you to the window, do yourself a favor. Don't look outside. Because if you do, you might see me. And if you do, it'll already be too late.